All right. Hi. Thank you guys for coming to our panel today. My name is Ruby Baer. I am the content marketing manager at ArenaNet and host of our weekly live stream Guild Chat. ArenaNet is the company that makes Guild Wars 2. We're going to talk today about making a game that serves such an enormous community. I have three of our developer guests here.
I was pointing out the enormous community we have.
Well, they're all playing the game.
Oh, right.
Geez, Josh, why aren't you playing the game?
Other games.
Why? Sorry. Why would you do that? Man, you're ruining everything. All right, so I think most people, if you're at this panel, you're probably already familiar with what an MMO is, massively multiplayer online role-playing game. We try not to call them MMORPGs as a rule.
It's an online world.
It's an online world.
Yeah.
We have so many people logging in to these online worlds from different countries, different walks of life, different ages, just all kinds of different people that have varying gameplay interests. And the challenge that all of us face, all of you guys especially, in making this over the years, is finding a way to offer something to all of those people so they can find something. The way that Leah phrased it while we were talking about this was so that everybody can find a little place to call home within the world. So.
That's adorable.
It was very cute. I liked that quite a lot.
Start a slow clap. For
A little golf clap for Leah. So Guild Wars 2 has had a really busy past year. Our core game went play for free back in August last summer, and we launched our first expansion in October. We had our first huge quarterly update for 2016 in January. So it's been extra interesting. We've had a lot more content to work with. And the thing that we're going to talk about today is how we make that content, how we keep such a diverse audience interested.
Yeah, and some of the process that we go through.
And the process,
Yeah.
the behind the scenes on how we create that. So I'm
Sure.
going to let you guys introduce yourselves, what you do at ArenaNet, and some of the things you've worked on over the years. Josh?
I'm an environment design specialist.
And
Yes.
troublemaker.
Yes.
And troublemaker, that's why he's sitting by me, just in case.
And what was the other part of the question? That- Oh, so some of the stuff that I've done?
There you go.
Okay, so I've been working on Living World since we launched. I mean, I've been working on Guild Wars since before Guild Wars 1, so
That's right. You've been
lots and lots of Guild Wars in.
11 years now, right?
12 and a half.
12 and a half, sorry.
Yeah. And so got on the Living World thing right from the get-go, and been pretty much on there ever since. So it's been a really exciting several years of experimenting and learning and growing towards greatness.
Which you have now achieved.
Not yet.
All right, you can go.
99%.
All right, Leah, top that.
Wow, achieving greatness. Hi, I'm Leah Hoyer, and I am the head of narrative at ArenaNet. So I have not been here 12 and a half years. I actually came to the company about a year and a half ago, and it was in the middle of our Living World Season 2. And so one of the things that's really unique about Guild Wars is that we do put out kind of episodic installment content that updates the world, furthers the story, creates sometimes new maps, all of that sort of thing. And I came in the middle of that season, and really my job is to oversee the narrative team, make sure we know where we're going in the long run, that we have a place so that we don't start painting ourselves into some weird corners and then we're like, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense for what we want to do next season or in the next expansion. And then I worked heavily also on Heart of Thorns, which was our first expansion, came out in October. And now I'm back to both working on our next expansion as well as the new Living World updates that are coming out.
Awesome. And Stephen?
Hi, everybody. My name's Steven. I am a game director at ArenaNet, and I coordinate the Living World, Raid, Legendary Weapons Journey, and Festival content, which basically means that I get to work with a lot of really creative people, artists, designers, programmers, narrative people to make very diverse and fun content in Guild Wars 2 and ship it to the live game.
The people in the next room are so excited about that.
Yeah.
You like brought the house
Thank you,
down.
next door.
my gosh, raids. All right, so that's a lot of different stuff that between the three of you that you're all working on. Let's start by, and this is a thing that every MMO addresses, all of the different kinds of content that you have to get into the game. We're going to be addressing Guild Wars 2 specifically because that's what we work on and that's what we know. Let's start by talking about some of the different kinds of content specifically over the past few years that we've put into Guild Wars 2 and how that addressed this issue of diverse player bases.
Yeah, I would start by saying, Living World, the concept of Living World was something that we started after we shipped Guild Wars 2 as basically a way for us to continue to update the live game, to continue to provide a continuation of the story, the personal story that people experienced in Guild Wars 2, and to add diverse and fun gameplay opportunities. So Living World is delivered through sort of an episodic style of content where we're progressing the overall world story as well as your personal character, your playable character story, and some NPCs that we have in the game. And so all of that goes into your story journal, and you're able to kind of play the Living World content at your own pace over time. But it's basically been setting up from where we ended the story in the Guild Wars 2 game to where we brought the story for Heart of Thorns. So Living World is one of the types of content that we create.
Yeah. And if you're not familiar, Living World is out in the open world of the game. You log in, and it affects the entire game world. It's not just little bits and pieces here and there that you have to go out of your way to track down.
Yeah, it's a combination over the last several years. We've introduced open world content, certainly, and open world maps, as well as story instances, which are generally catered to 1 to 5 players. And we find that the story instances is really the best place to tell story because it's a little bit more of a controlled environment. That doesn't mean that we don't have things in the open world that also progress the story, but it is where we are able to really kind of focus in on the story and the character development in a more personal environment. But generally it weaves through the open world as well, and there are things that are happening and changing in the world which make it a living world. We destroyed one of our major city hubs in one of our episodes. We've introduced new maps that have playable space. So it's a living, changing world.
Yeah, we've been experimenting over the past several years to kind of find that sweet spot of the kind of content that we want to release, that we can do really well, and within our time budgets and that kind of stuff, and that people find captivating. So that's been a really fun process, and getting that feedback from the community, which we all watch very closely, and acting on it as best we can. That's been really fun.
Stephen mentioned destroying one of our major cities and putting that back after how long was that down? That was
Probably
a year. It was down for a while. That was an enormous step that we took, and that felt like something really risky. But it put out there something that would affect every player in our game, because I don't know. Yeah, we blew that thing right up.
I remember
statue.
That right there, yeah.
Oh, that poor lion statue.
I remember
God
when
help
we
it.
were talking to some of the press that had a little bit of early access to where we were going with the story, and they were like, "You're gonna do what? You're gonna blow up your major city hub?" And we were like, "Yeah, that's where the story took us, and that's what we always want to do, is we want to follow the story." And that was the natural progression of where we were headed. So it was a big step, and some people thought we were crazy. It was a heck of a lot of fun to destroy the city and to rebuild it as well, which we eventually did. So.
Yeah, Josh, do you want to talk? You were on the rebuilding of Lion's Arch, right?
I was on every version
You
of
were on
Lion's Arch,
everything.
even back to Guild Wars 1. So
That's right.
Yeah, I built out most of Lion's Arch, the surrounding areas. The very central area was done by kind of a crack squad of concept artists, and then it was left to people like me to go clean it up and make it so it's actually playable. So I want to say we spent almost 6 months on the first version of Lion's Arch in Guild Wars 2, and then that just got completely obliterated.
You didn't spend too much time on the lion, did you?
See, that lion was really exciting to me. That's my favorite prop I ever made in the game.
Oh my gosh.
Because I'm really excited about the idea of telling stories through props, environmental storytelling, props and environments. And so I put a lot of thought into the design of that statue, how it's both a literal metaphor of a lion arching, but it's also over Tyria to show that they're dominating, and the way they're dominating is with the ships circling the globe, indicating that it's through trade that they dominate, and all this beautiful symbolism is swiped away.
It's a really nice statue.
Yeah, but I mean, it's exciting to me that I work on a game that can do that can take those kind of risks. It reminds me of something that George Lucas, on one of his early behind-the-scenes things, it was a Star Wars special. I saw one as a kid, and he was talking about how much time they put into these alien legs that just walk by the camera in about a second of time, and how much money and time it took to get that thing. And that was just kind of a revelation to me that like it's about the impact of what you're doing rather than the time spent doing it.
Right, and you had a lot of meaning in that statue with the boat circling. And
so we tried to put a lot of thought into the new Lion's Arch as well. So yeah,
a lot of city planning kind of thinking when it comes to rebuilding LA. We're looking at kind of the relationship between where the bank and the trading post, and being able to do repairs, and we built out our competitive area a little bit more so that we kind of had our World versus World and PvP players more centralized, and so there was an opportunity in the reconstruction to do some things looking at it from sort of a city planning standpoint, and again the player experience of what it's like to move through the space and get to the areas that you want to get to, as well as the aesthetics and all the other storytelling elements that we add. And so I think, again, for me, that's the fun part is, Josh talks about what he puts into the statue, and it's like there are people doing that in a variety of different areas, whether it's the story aspects or the overall map layout or things like that all eventually contribute to something that's greater than the individual pieces parts, which is ultimately what I try to help coordinate, is bring all the things together in a way that feels greater than the individual parts.
Right. What are some of the other game parts that, you're talking about bringing some of the little pieces together? What are some of the other parts of the game that you have in mind when you're talking about that?
Yeah, I don't know that there are any parts of development where we don't generally think about that, but another type of content that we've recently introduced has been raids, and similarly, it's got opportunities for us to look at what are the ideas that the designers have. Living World is kind of our mechanism for telling story primarily. We certainly introduce a variety of gameplay and fun things to do there. In raids, we generally start thinking about what are the cool game mechanics that we can introduce. There's certainly an underlying story, thematic story that's introduced there, but raids are much more about our 10-player instance, difficult, challenging endgame content. But we're still looking at, what is the overall impact of the environment, the bosses, what are we saying with VO that sort of helps accentuate what's going on, or to get across messaging so players know what's happening, either story or gameplay wise. And so, raids is another area where we've got a multitude of people all kind of working towards one goal, where you're thinking about all the different pieces and how do they fit together to really make kind of a cohesive experience.
Yeah, and raids in particular is a really interesting challenge, because not everyone who plays our game is a raider. Folks who, I personally am pretty bad at raids, to be honest. I will get my butt handed to me within the first wing of a raid. But we made a decision that it's in a really interesting part of the map. It's in an interesting part of the world, and it does actually further the story, but it's a challenge for us because you don't want it to have huge revelations or have these sorts of things that the players who log into our living world and play our central story, which admittedly is not the same type of gameplay. In general, we design all of our core story to be soloable. You can go in just as yourself, and you can make sure, it may take a couple times. You might, die and respawn a few times, but
more than a couple.
It depending on what battle and how mean the designer was who put that thing together. But you can solo it, whereas raids is not there, and so it's very much an interesting challenge that we would sit around and talk about with people about, okay, what is the right kind of story that gives a nice flavor and gives you this sort of thing. But once we come back to Living World, that you're going to be able to get recapped on, that you're going to be able to figure out these other things fairly quickly, so that you're not going to feel like you're left out if you and your 9 other friends didn't come in with your awesome rating skills and get to the end. But if you did, there's fun nuggets that you're going to get to experience, which is a really cool thing, but it's a hard balance that we've actually spent a lot of time trying to figure out.
Yeah.
I feel like we try to do the general theme that Living World is going to do, that's echoed in the raids, but the actual plot moving forward is not in the raids.
Yeah, it's
Is that a
definitely
fair
not
way to
part of
put
the
it?
main sort of through line of the story. It is more thematically tied.
Yeah, it was an interesting balance to strike, making it fit so you didn't just have this random weird thing that you shoehorned into a corner of the world.
Yeah, and I think that the flip side too is that, to not tell any story at all in a raid would make raids less. And so I don't think that there is a proper way to do a raid without some sort of thematic element, some sort of progression in there that's meaningful to people. So we definitely don't want to just extract that part out, but we are sensitive to trying to keep it not main through line and not too many major reveals that are blocked for people that may not play that type of content.
So now that we've talked about the really hardcore content of raids, let's go to the other end of the spectrum at some of the pop in and play and pop out, just little, pick up and play stuff. We've got a lot of bits and pieces of that here and there in the world, like jumping puzzles and adventures. Do you guys want to talk about those a little bit and how you came up with the concepts, especially of the jumping puzzles? Because I know that's either a love it or you hate it because you fall a lot thing.
When your first 2 characters are a Norn and a Char, they're awful.
That was you?
and then I realized that's kind of an excuse for me to not be particularly good at. Wait, is there a portion of the game I am good at? I'm making it sound like I can't play our game. I actually figured out jumping puzzles eventually, but it took so much practice for me.
She can
And then
really
when I
play our
got
game.
in Asura, it was actually substantially easier. Hint, hint. But the thing is, sort of to what Stephen was saying, even though those aren't necessarily the things that we're designing, I know that even the narrative team, as we're looking at all of these pieces, we work really closely with the design team when they're putting something in to make sure that this is the right kind of place for a jumping puzzle to be, or the right kind of place for, go out and do a collection quest of something, because it makes sense for the denizens of that particular area.
Yeah.
And I think actually Heart of Thorns was full of those kind of fun little one-off quests where, probably some of my favorite stuff was in your second map, the one with the Golden City and that sort of thing. You run into the Skrit, which are a long-standing group of these kind of rat-type folks that, they're very much into mining, and their favorite thing is gold and anything shiny. And they find themselves now in a map where there's an entire city made of gold and these golden floating people, the Exalted, that are around there. And you run into a couple of these quests where some of the Skrit, there's this one female Skrit who's sort of the leader of this area, and she falls in love with one of these golden people, and these various quests that go along with that out in the open world. It is just so much fun because they're the ultimate shiny. And so it made so much sense for the Skrit to be super excited about this whole golden universe and all the things that were there. And of course, if I'm a Skrit, I'm going to fall in love with a golden person and think that they have to be mine. And she just tries so hard to make this romance really come true. And you go through all these things, helping her do things or trying to thwart her, depending on the various pieces that are out there. But that kind of fun content that you can play a little 5-minute thing.
Right, having things like that you can just stumble across and, okay, here's a little thing that I can go do, and I can feel like I got something done when I'm a game player who is really busy and doesn't have a ton of time to jump in and devote hours and hours. Josh, you've been putting these pieces into the game since the very beginning.
Yeah, well, it's just kind of a natural thing that would because in Guild Wars 1 we had no jumping, and once we had an engine with jumping, it just was the obvious thing to do, right?
Tell us how you felt about finally having jumping in Guild Wars 2.
It was wonderful.
It really was.
So we just as level artists, we were cobbling together challenging jumps from the get-go just for fun, and it wasn't until near the end of the project that the designers started saying, we could actually make this some interesting content, and then we started incorporating them because the maps are gigantic, and to make them organic, you make them windy, and so there's lots of negative space on there. And so it just was natural to fill those in with kind of side quest stuff that not everyone's interested in, but the people who look for it can find it and do that stuff.
I think
And
that's
maybe discover a disco.
Yeah.
Do what, Stephen?
I was just going to say, I think that's part of it is, for that type of content, it's a little bit about discovery. You could be traveling somewhere and then see, oh, there's an interesting jump. Oh, look, there's another jump ahead. And before you know it, you're actually engaged in a jumping puzzle. And so, there's exploration aspects to the game, there's combat aspects to the game, there's social aspects to the game, exploration. And so I think that speaks to kind of the idea of something that everyone can enjoy. And that's been a big part of what we've developed with Guild Wars 2, is trying to have that diversity of content so that everyone can find something that they really love.
Right, because not everybody is the kind of player who's going to want to go in there and round up 15 of your closest friends and go do something. Sometimes you want to just go in there and play just solo, maybe just with a friend.
Yeah, and we have the areas where you can play with 50 people in a squad and go play an open world map that's got a meta where you really need to coordinate. So yeah, it's everything from single player activities that are story driven, or single player activities that are exploration or jumping puzzles, etc., all the way up to big open world map metas where you're coordinating with a large group of people and really doing challenging content, if not in terms of having to do a lot of damage to creatures, but just coordinating with other people.
Yeah. I mean, even jumping puzzles, I think when we go into everything that we do, we keep in mind that what's one of our core values is that we want it to be a game that is about community and about helping each other. And we actually have, I think, the coolest gaming community out there, because they really do, aside from folks who may be in a guild together, like you can show up as a new player and the number of people who will come and help you out. I mean, we had a bunch of our core long-standing players who over the summer we went free to play with our core base game, and they organized this whole let's go welcome new players into the game, and they just arrived in the maps en masse to get all these people who were going to show up as free to play and sort of help them with some of this. We all know when you start playing a game, there's going to be those few things you need to learn before you figure out that you're totally getting it, and they're helping people along. And even with jumping puzzles, you might not know someone, but if you're standing at the base of it and you see somebody doing it, you're like, wait a minute, was there a certain foothold I was supposed to jump to or something?
I'm supposed
They'll
to do?
totally in chat help you out and help that kind of stuff. And it's really cool to see that, but we also always keep that in mind when we're designing the spaces, when we're designing things to do, because whether you're soloing it or whether you're coordinating with 50 people, you are going to be looking at ways or thinking about ways that it can actually be sort of a social experience, because so much of gaming these days is, and our game is built around that. So
Yeah, that is kind of one of the core tenets, is we want it to be more fun when you come across other people. When you come across other people, you don't want to be thinking about, are they going to take my loot, or things like that. And so that is kind of one of the core tenets, is when you see somebody else, it should enrich the overall experience.
You don't want to get preemptively angry and cringe and hope they go away.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about, as we're doing this, as we've been developing Guild Wars 2 over the years, and keeping this huge, diverse player base in mind, what are some of the challenges that you guys have come across, and some of the things that you've had to learn and figure out as you go in trying to create something where everyone can find a place for themselves?
I think that when you talk about challenges, I look at it from two different angles. One is the challenges of making every release that we do, which, when we start on a release, it's always that moment of, oh, I'm so excited, I can't wait to see what this thing's going to be, and how the heck are we going to do this? And somehow you're able to always do it, and I think that helps. You look back and you're like, remember when we started with a couple of ideas and we shipped that in the game? So there's always that aspect. I think in terms of the players, something that we're always looking to do is incorporate a bit of that personal experience. When you play the Guild Wars game, you have a personal story, you make some choices about where your background is from, and what order you're going to go into, and things like that. And so over time we've definitely introduced that in ways in the story where they'll recognize or react to a choice that you've made and respond to you differently. In some cases it's based on your profession, you may have access to a little bit more information, things like that, that really give it another layer of sort of a personal experience for you.
Yeah, and I think that's always the really interesting part, especially for like when we're thinking about telling the story as well, we're always thinking about that. I do think we did some really cool things like in Heart of Thorns. You know, there's an entire race of people in our game. How many people here, just so I'm curious, how many people here have played Guild Wars? So I'm sort of, or Guild Wars 2. So I don't know. There's a race in our game that are called the Sylvari, and there were some pretty intriguing things that happened kind of right at the beginning of Heart of Thorns that really made their entire journey very different than anybody else who was there. And so it was really intriguing to put in lots of things that gave you a really different experience if you were playing Sylvari or if you were playing one of our other 4 playable races, and also encourage people to do it twice. And those things are the really fun challenge, and they're a really great place. I would say the other challenge that is in some ways much harder, and we're always thinking about it, is because we are also an RPG. When we're talking about writing games, and particularly when it comes into more of the details like the dialogues and some of the actions and the choices that you're doing, you know, if you're in there and you're role playing and you're very invested in your character, we're always concerned about making sure that we're not doing certain things that might be so splitting to cause people to go, well, my character would never have said that. Like that, what? That's not what I want to do. So we're always thinking about that too. And that's a big challenge. I think we actually are getting much better at it in terms of really taking on the player character is now sort of the commander, you know? And so there's a certain thing that when you are that player character, you are going to be the commander. And so there's that voice that happens regardless. But we make now a lot of alternate lines based on, say you're playing in Asura, or say you chose Order of Whispers. That says something kind of specific about you and what your character may be like and what their personality may be like. So there are times when we have options and we might have, you know, 15 different options for what the line is that character says at that time, because we may change it both for what race they are and what order they chose, or all those sorts of things. Or sometimes for profession. And that, I think, is a cool thing that we're doing to tackle that challenge.
Yeah, and it can affect combat sometimes too. I remember we did Tower of Nightmares, and that was one of the things that we were playing up on, is the idea of the nightmares, and based on choices that you made, we might have spawned a different character in one of the nightmares that you would have to fight. And for some people that was difficult because they were forced to fight characters that they liked or cared about. So.
I forgot about that until I think I blocked it out. It was a little traumatic. It was kind of sad. That is a thing, that's a way that the game has grown over the years that I've really enjoyed seeing. The player characters talking is something that our community responded really well to and enjoyed quite a lot. But like the Sylvari race that get more information on certain things if you're playing through as that particular race. The Asura that Leah mentioned, if you're not familiar, they're a hyper-intelligent race and can glean more from technology that they're up to that other player character races can't know about. So that's a thing that we've managed to, that we've put a lot of work in on over the years to make it more interesting. And two, a lot of people have alts. I think just about everybody has alts, and you don't want to play through and have a static experience every single time.
No, I did a lot of encouraging people to, you know, level up a Sylvari character before Heart of Thorns. And I will say, as the next Living World's coming out, I do think it will be really interesting because, you know, we came out with a new Asura city in Heart of Thorns, and we didn't spend a lot of time in the core story experience there in the expansion. It was sort of like we uncovered it, we found some things about it, but in terms of where we're going next, well, it's certainly not the last time we're going to go back to that city, and you know, the kind of things that you may experience if you're in Asura versus not in Asura could be very different. And we look for those kind of opportunities to do that as much as possible.
We've talked a lot about, you know, here's how we look at how we're creating this stuff, how we get into this. Let's talk a little bit about the process as you get started. Here's this thing that we want to do. Stephen, you talked about how we started with just a couple of ideas, and we looked back. Where did the three of you even begin when you want to put something in the,
arm wrestling?
Start with the whiteboard and the Post-it notes and go from there.
I think that story is involved in almost all of the content that we do, and so to some level we have that high-level outline of where we're going with the story, and that gives us a foundation to build off of. I would say very closely in line with that, though, we're also looking at, what are some of the game mechanics and the design ideas that people have for the game, new encounters that they want to develop, or things we've learned from doing open world maps and we want to, build on those experiences. There may be certain things that they want to do in terms of, going to certain locations, environmental layouts for maps that they're interested in, that they think are cool. And so we kind of start with the highest level bits of information in all those areas, and then we try to get as many of those folks together to really start fleshing out how they might fit together and sort of what's that next level of detail on all of them. And some ideas come up that we're like, oh my gosh, that's the best thing ever. Sometimes ideas start to fall out when we look at like, oh, here's the pros and cons of that, or there's a challenge, it's not going to work with where we're going with the story or whatever. So we start there and we just kind of work through iteratively. If I were to get a little bit more detailed, we generally start with what we would call a pitch. It's like the simplest 1 or 2 page concept of what we're interested in doing, and involves touching on all of those key areas, the story, the environment, the gameplay, and then we'll get into doing some prototyping where we're actually trying out some of those things and figuring out, that idea we had for this particular mechanic, let's get it in as quickly as we can and play it and see if it actually is going to be fun. Once we get past that, then we'll actually get into full-on design and development of an episode where we're iterating a lot. We do a lot of play tests where we get the team together. We've got alpha play testers that come in, and we just play it regularly and try to give feedback. Everybody on the team gives feedback. It doesn't matter if you're not a designer, you can have feedback on the design. Story folks have good ideas on art, and I think that cross-pollination really helps. And eventually we get to a point where we've kind of got what we would call like a first playable or a feature complete set.
Right.
And at that point, we're really looking at everything cohesively from beginning to end and seeing how the overall experience feels and making any adjustments from there, is mostly polishing and kind of tweaking and improving to really get to a point where we feel like it's the quality level that we want. And at that point, it's mostly just, bug fixing and that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And I think some of that, my favorite kind of piece of that early ideating about what's going on is, we might have an idea. We try and keep it fairly high level for where the story needs to go, say in this next chapter of stuff, because you do want those details to be filled in by the team. You want everybody to come together. But, Josh and I have had various conversations where maybe it'll say like, oh, we're going to do this, or we're going to reintroduce this character. And then that can spark something in him going, oh, you know what? Like 2 years ago, I was working on this thing that was just kind of this fun side project, and we didn't really have any place to put it. But if we're going to reintroduce that character, wouldn't it be awesome if we did this particular thing? And we're like, you made a whole separate like room of awesomeness over here. Yeah, let's talk about that. And going back and forth. And a lot of times actually there may be those high levels, but we have someone on art who says, you know what, I've been kind of, or like our creature team or something says like, I've been working on a creature that looks like this and does this particular thing. It feels like, if this creature was over in this, sort of came up over in this other region, it'd have these different traits and it'd do this. Is there something we could do with that? Sometimes that sparks something for us, or it works for the gameplay team. And definitely like when we found out we were going to be able to have your characters actually walking and talking and fighting and doing all of that in the same time, which sounds like it's a fairly straightforward thing when you're on an MMO and you have to worry about bandwidth and stuff. The fact that we were able to figure that out for Heart of Thorns was huge, and it opened up all the things we could do, and it made like that inner relationship of all of it so great. So when we get in the room with like Josh and designers and everybody, and we're all sitting around and we're talking about it, that's when the really cool things, I think, bubble up, and you start to realize how much your ideas are so much better when you're sharing them with one another, and they become like the product of all of that.
Right.
Yeah, having the cross disciplines, all those are some of my fondest memories of working on Guild Wars 2, are the brainstorming meetings where we'd have animators and concept artists and designers and QA and producers, like everyone in the room just throwing out all the ideas and writing them up on the whiteboard and seeing what everyone gets excited about.
Yeah, a perfect
Super
example
fun.
of that would be, I think back to when we did the first Winter's Day holiday, which is our wintertime holiday in Guild Wars 2, and we kind of struck up on this idea of sort of the miniature villages that people sometimes have in their house at the holidays with like trains and stuff running through them. And so we kind of got caught on this idea of what would it be like to be a big person in a little town like that. And so we ended up with an airship of sort of our version of Santa Claus that comes and delivers presents, and he's got a mini village where he's building all of these toys, and you could actually go in there and like destroy little buildings and stuff and felt like the giant in there. And then that even carried over into our PvP match, which was a snowball fight. That's actually inside of a snow globe. So if you look up, you see that like, oh, I'm inside a snow globe. And so there's a snow globe out in the outer world that you can see, oh, look, there's some trees and stuff. And then next thing you know, you're actually inside of that environment. So we played a lot with scale and size relative in that. And, you know, just that idea of playing with scale was really interesting and manifested itself in a couple of different ways in that release.
Speaking of festivals, I want to address the question of festivals real quick, and then we've left a couple minutes for questions from you guys in the audience. Something that we have managed to do in our festivals, you know, we've got Halloween and Winter's Day, our two big ones. And it's a thing that we want to make sure all of our player base can enjoy. So we have content in there that that goes all the way from, like we said before, the little quick pick up and play. You know, you can run around and do these things, give orphans warm sweaters, all the way up to so many sweaters, you guys, so many sweaters. All the way up to things that are more involved and take a longer amount of time. How did you guys manage to cover that entire scale without just completely killing yourselves with work?
I think we just killed ourselves with work.
All right. I tried.
For the first one, yeah.
It's always a tough one because people get really excited about ideas.
Yes.
And that's great because, you know, great ideas come from a lot of different areas. At some point, it's always a question of some things great on their own don't really work with the pieces when they all start to come together. And so some things kind of get left on the cutting room floor, and maybe we revisit it in the future. And then at some point we're like, we could probably just continue to refine this thing forever, and like a year later, wouldn't it be great if we did this other thing? So at some point,
you have to release the
ship
thing.
your stuff, and so you end up setting some goals for when you want to be done, and then everyone starts working towards that. And you know, we work with our production group to really try and set reasonable schedules, but at some point everyone decides we do want to ship, and so let's move forward, and you know, maybe we'll revisit some things later.
Well,
in different
specifically
ways.
with Halloween, because that was our first Living World update, and so we were pretty much throwing everything at the wall to see what would stick.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of people with a lot of different passions. You know, I'm really like the jumpy kind of stuff, and
Yes, you do.
You know, so I said, let's make the ultimate jumping puzzle, and you know, other people like the PvP, you know, game types, and so yeah, because there was so much passion, we kind of drove ourselves to try a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's just the part of the process of learning what works in our game, and you know, what doesn't work so well. And
Yeah.
so.
The way you say "because there was so much passion" makes me feel like there was a really big fight in one of the meeting rooms somewhere.
There are disagreements. I mean,
Yes, no,
if
it's
there
true.
aren't, I
Everybody's
would be concerned.
different idea. Yeah.
Right? Like that, I think people have passion, and you know, as long as you're coming at it from a position of respect and you know, appreciation that everyone is working on trying to make something that they feel is going to be great.
Yeah.
But if there's no disagreements, then there's probably not the best ideas making their way to the forefront.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you guys one last question while I'm doing that. If you guys have any questions for the devs, Lizzie's up here, and she will take your questions and help you. Did you get the microphone? Okay. And she will get you up here to ask questions for us. I am curious, what is your favorite piece of content that each of you have helped put into Guild Wars 2? And how come? And Josh, you're sitting closest to me, so you have to answer first.
Oh boy. Well, like I said, the jumping thing is my passion. So,
Pick a jumping puzzle. Pick a favorite child, Josh.
well, it was the Super Adventure Box. So that was like
You're allowed to say it.
Yeah, it was a really unique experience to be able to say, hey, I've got this idea for this really crazy thing, and to actually be empowered to do that with a little team, and did that little side project. So yeah,
So much fun.
Super fun.
Do you want to? It was super fun.
Super fun.
Very nice. For those of you who aren't familiar, well, you know, it's your baby. You can describe what it was for people who aren't familiar.
Oh, well, if you're not, it's so Super Adventure Box is an 8-bit inspired jumping puzzle dungeon kind of thing for 5 people to go through and play like an old Nintendo game, but with their Guild Wars characters.
Yeah, within this world that looks nothing like it otherwise. It was a lot of fun. All right, how about you, Leah?
Goodness, that's a really hard one. Because overall, there's so many things about the Heart of Thorn story that I'm actually really proud of. I think that the way that we integrated a lot of things with our tech team and our design team, and we put in really good choices and sort of really meaningful changes between things. I feel like, again, whether it was your race or whatever, goodness, I think, and some of the character stories and just the moments that we had to kind of work with there, I think were very cool. Yeah, honestly, it's sort of hard for me to pick anything, but I think the kind of moment where we leave where we're sort of where Timey makes this really kind of tough choice in the middle of Radanovis probably is like a moment that I go, yes, and that feels really like, you know, it gave me all the feels, like even just listening to the voice actors do it in the booth, I was like, oh my god, it's giving me one of those.
So you were responsible for that?
Yeah, well, no, the team was responsible for that. Like, but I'm part of the
at my
story,
computer.
So, yeah, and there are a lot of those moments there that I felt were really cool. And to be honest, what I'm also kind of excited about is how I feel like that did a really good job of setting up other things that are to come. And that's, I think, maybe for myself, the thing I'm most excited about having done is really making sure that we do know where we're going and finding ways to kind of piece things out over time, because you can't just think about it episode by episode, or you can't think about it even season by season. Sometimes you want to, you know, lay some groundwork for something in the first or second season that pays off 3 years later, and we're starting to really do so much more of that in a way that I'm so excited about.
Well, that's the thing you mentioned. As a head of narrative, you have to be thinking that far ahead so you don't paint us into a corner later.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree. We've had a lot of really great, especially when I first got there, we had a lot of really great like long-term planning talks that every time now when we're talking about something, it's so much easier for us to say, well, is this gonna, if we're thinking about a big plot point, is this going to help us get there?
Yeah.
You know, and having that place to go to.
To that side of
yeah,
the room.
right over there. We are going
lights.
right there.
It doesn't seem like it should take this long, but you know. Okay,
Yeah.
We're getting close on time. So, Stephen, this feels like a cheaty question for you as a game director. It's like you've had your finger in all the pies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't pick my favorite child.
Do it.
Real quick, I loved the first holidays we did with, Halloween and the Mad King busting out and destroying Josh's statue. I enjoyed a lot our Flame and Frost release.
That was actually my idea, because when I was a kid, I loved that scene in the Muppet movie where Animal grows giant and he busts out of a building, and I wanted to recreate that. So.
Yeah. Flame and Frost was great. It was sort of a 5-person mini dungeon that you sort of explored, that there was an impending invasion.
That was fun.
We did the Nightmare Tower, which was sort of an open world dungeon where you traveled to the top, and along the way had sort of a variety of fights culminating in destroying the tower. We did the Labyrinthine Cliffs area, which was rock faces overlooking the ocean, and joy of movement and jumping and exploration. We did Silver Waste, which was really awesome, where it's open world defending and sieging towers, that if you hold them all, then you have mini bosses followed by a main boss. And so I think it speaks to, again, the idea of doing a lot of diverse content. There's a lot of fun, different things that we've done across all the years with Living World, and it's been fun doing all of them.
Yeah, that was like 10 pieces of content. This is hard.
Yeah.
But I can't argue with you on any of them.
Yeah. And I had to leave some out.
I know. All right, we have like 2 minutes left, so let's.
Hold on, I have a quick update.
No.
There's an insect crawling on my PS Vita right now. It's very cute. Okay, sorry,
Get away
go ahead.
from. Go. Get just.
Hello, my name is
Hi.
Daniel.
Help me.
Hi, Daniel.
And as a writer, and I've heard that you said having the long-term plans about we want to reach here or whatever. I'm a speculative fiction writer. So how do you know when is the right time to release a new episode, and how far in advance are you planning that next episode before you release it? Because you might have one that's like, oh yeah, this was really good, and it's like, and then it's out there and it's like, wow, that kind of went a lot faster than we thought it did, or it didn't catch on as much as we thought it would. So we need to roll out another episode because people are like, well, that adventure didn't suit me as much as it might have Shaw. So what is that process like?
Well, I will say the timing of episodic releases is something we've actually had a lot of internal discussions about right now, and it's part of it is, bluntly, when you're in the game world, making games is hard, and at some point you are only able to get something out as quickly as you can get it out. So we're only so much in control of how quick of a cadence we have. I think, to your point, the thing I will say is the pacing of those beats across time is actually something that we do spend a lot of time thinking about. And how soon is it to reveal something? Because if you reveal it too soon, will you get too many people knowing exactly where you're going? Because that's not fun. Like, you want the surprise, and you want people to, ideally, we have the biggest win when everyone in the community watches an episode and you have, 15% of the people thinking this is going to happen next, and 40% of the people thinking this is going to happen next, and another 40 thinking this, and then there's like 5% who are thinking something else, and they're all like sure and arguing and like hearing each other's sides. That, I think, is the part that we really push for, and it's a hard thing to say, oh, here's a perfect formula for how to do it, because none of that is math, but the thoughts of what we're always thinking about is, what are the big things in each episode that we want people to leave and talk about and really remember? Like, oh, wow, we found out this really critical piece of information, or the world totally changed because of something. And we want to make sure that every time we put out an episode, one of those happens, but they're all going towards that ultimate goal. Yeah. And I think what we find in our world is that there are several different storylines kind of ongoing. And so what's nice for us is we, much like a 1-hour drama on television, like, you never just follow this one storyline from start to finish. We get to go and follow this storyline and then connect with this one and connect with this one, and maybe in a certain episode we don't even see the second storyline at all. We connect with that a little later when it feels like it's the right time, weaving into the rest of it. But we spend a lot of time thinking about that.
Yeah, and in general, the further out it is, the less detail we want to put into it. Yep. It's sort of levels of granularity. So we generally know where we're going, or on an episode level, we start with kind of a couple of high-level points. If you get too detailed, too far out, those plans fall apart anyway. It needs to be kind of a process of revealing each layer and having more detail come as you go. So if you have too much detail too far, it generally won't look anything like that when you get there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we're at time, guys. They're sending in bugs to make us leave. So thank you
Thank
guys
you.
very much for
Thank
coming.
you so much.
Thank you.